everyone, and welcome to the Rewatch podcast presented by the Terrible Video Gamers Game Club. I'm your host master, Tyler Schatz, here with me to kind of go through and rewatch some of the old Game of Thrones show. I've got a few friends here. We'll start off with Mr. Alex Purdy.
Hello. How's it going?
Welcome, Purd. Next up is our good friend Josh Cox.
Hello.
And then we've got the great Nick Castillo.
Hello, everyone.
And then Mr. A.T.
How's it going?
Welcome, guys. So, with the fun pandemic slowly dying, of course, this would have been a lot better to do during the pandemic. I thought I've been kind of getting that itch to rewatch the Game of Thrones show for whatever reason. I don't know why, but the show ended in 2019, and my history of kind of watching it starts somewhere in the middle, binge watching the first 3 seasons about 4 or 5 times as each new season released. And I was just like, I kind of want to rewatch the show. I think something about it still kind of just tingles in the back of my mind. So I figured, hey, let's just turn the mics on, get a bunch of people together and start watching the show and just see what happens here. So kind of just thought I'd go around here, introduce everybody to the group as we've already done, and just kind of explain a little bit about our history of watching the show and kind of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Alex, you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, well, my history with Game of Thrones, actually, I started watching it at the recommendation of Tyler. I think at that time, you even let me borrow the DVDs of a certain couple seasons to watch it. But anyway, so my journey, I guess, started maybe 2015, 16-ish, when the show was already well into kind of its peak popularity. But I'm also pissed off with how it ended, which I'm sure will be a big discussion we have that we can't go into now. So I'm kind of a cynic of the show now. Like, I don't really recommend it to people because I hate letdowns, but that's just me. But I'm excited to rewatch the first 7 seasons.
Oh, geez, you're going to go all the way up to the first 7 seasons and then really drop your head, huh?
Yeah.
Next, we'll move over to Josh. You want to kind of talk about a little bit about your history? You seem to be kind of the unspoiled one of all of us.
Right, I'm the unspoiled here. Yeah, I started watching Game of Thrones a couple years after it got big. Me and a roommate at the time were watching it together, and I came home from work one day and just in a torrid affair saw him watching Game of Thrones without me, and so from then on I just ditched out. That was somewhere in season 2. We were watching it at that point. So it was one of those things. I just didn't really watch TV myself at the time, so just never continued with it. I enjoyed it for what it was. But yeah, so somewhere in season 2 is where I last left off. Never read the books, and it was one of those things I kept always thinking, oh man, I heard about this episode. It sounds good. Then as seasons kept progressing, like Purdy alluded to, it was just, oh, this season sounds worse. Oh, this season sounds real bad. Oh, everything sounds terrible. So I just never really got into it, but it sounded like a good excuse to hop in and rewatch it and experience it one step at a time again.
Did you ever have any kind of like desire to pick it up throughout the show's run at some point in time and just start rewatching?
Not really. Because it was one of those things, like, it felt like such a dense thing to try and go through and rewatch just to make sure that I kept up on what I had seen previously. And, I don't know. It's a dense thing to just go through by yourself, I feel like. It felt like a product of kind of that zeitgeist of, like, people are sitting around watching it and talking about it at the same time. So then to just be this solo affair of just watching it yourself and consuming it there just felt extra dense for that, personally.
Okay.
I get that.
Yep. Some people, I've always kind of heard that this show even referenced to as like one of the last water cooler shows, basically just one of the last big shows to basically air that where people, like, everybody watched it, and after the episode aired, everybody would get together the next day just to discuss it.
All right.
I don't know of any other shows kind of currently out there filling that void, but then again, I don't know about most shows until they kind of hit big, and then I watch it 3 seasons later after everyone's already gone through.
You could argue maybe the not the Boba Fett, oh my gosh, the Mandalorian series was sort of like that for really hardcore nerds, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe.
From that response, the answer is no. Never mind.
Well, it's just kind of hard to kind of judge like what is one of these big shows nowadays, just because everything is like, this is a larger discussion to have too. Everything is just so spread out across multiple streaming platforms and everything like that.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, at least HBO was a channel you could pay a little extra for, or, you know, obviously too, you can get the app to watch at that point in time. Actually, they didn't have the separate app at that point in time.
Yeah.
But it's
When we were watching it, it was getting DVDs through Netflix. Yeah.
oh jeez.
Like the mail.
Wow.
Yeah.
Netflix. Holy
Yeah.
cow!
That's old school Netflix.
How
Wow.
are you? No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely old school. Holy cow!
Yeah. Well, there
I
we
mean,
go.
I think there's still a corner of Netflix where you can still get DVDs, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so it's not like it's impossible. It's just one of those things that was the way you could grab Game of Thrones easily if you were not an HBO subscriber.
Sure.
Okay. Nick, you want to take over? Kind of what's your history with the show and the lore is?
Sure. So yeah, my name's Nick. I've always really liked dragons. I was talking with the group a little bit before we started. I played Dungeons and Dragons in college. I love creating stories, fantasy and sci-fi and all that stuff. And so it sort of really just sort of fell into a niche for me where I love learning about the history and the stories, and I love the lore, like the worlds that we like to talk about. Like in this case, we just mentioned The Mandalorian and Star Wars. And for me, one of the big appeals to that is not just the current story, but the story that's come before. Like these characters are here in this turmoil because of everything that, they did previously or their ancestors did previously. And that's always been a huge draw for me. It gives more context and more depth to the characters. To the point that Perd made earlier about The Mandalorian being a big thing, I think that is something that a lot of people, have an interest in, but it's got that Star Wars tag on the front of it. So if somebody doesn't like Star Wars, first of all, they're wrong. But, then they're like, oh, well, I don't want to watch it because I'm not a big Star Wars fan. Whereas I think Game of Thrones, the books have been out for some time, but not a lot of people knew who George R.R. Martin was or knew what A Song of Ice and Fire was. And so I think that a lot of people could kind of, at least for the show's sake, start on a level playing field where you didn't have to say watch the prequels or watch the movies or know who all these other characters were and start fresh. So I think that was the appeal as well. As far as my history, yeah, I have not read any of the books. I hope to. I want to. I actually have them right here next to me so I can see the names for all the books. I've only seen all of the TV series, but then I've also read cover to cover. The one book that I did read, again, I love the lore and the history, is I read The World of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin and Elio Garcia and Linda Antonsen, which is the whole history of Westeros, Essos, and the worlds beyond. The Lands Beyond, which tells all of the story of, the Targaryen kings and who the Starks are and all these other characters and what their relations are to each other, that goes all the way up to Robert's Rebellion, which is where the show starts. And so I'm really excited. Something that's really got me on the hook with when Shotzi proposed this podcast is to rewatch this show now with an understanding of, especially in the earlier seasons, how these characters know each other. What's at stake, or what have they already risked for one another going into episode 1, season 1, and who these characters are, knowing what's transpired. So that's something that I'm really excited for.
Okay. So kind of just going back to some of your point, I had a comment there of like, you kind of like, it sounds to me like a lived in world already, like a
Absolutely
broken down and established world. There are rules to this world already. And there's a hierarchy or structure to how everything kind of goes.
Absolutely. Not to go too nerd on especially other shows, but I think that Star Wars was one of the first sci-fi shows to imagine a used universe. And that was something that George Lucas always told was it was so neat because you see, Buck Rogers and all these space odysseys where everything is bright, shiny, and new. Whereas Star Wars starts in the middle of nowhere desert and everything is ruined and used and worn. And that tells the history of all this that has transpired already. Even if you go into like Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's universe, there's years and eons of the Númenórean kings before you even hear the word Aragorn or you start talking about who Sauron is and where he comes into the whole story. And so all of that stuff is so cool. It's not just the current conflict. It's that the conflict is so paramount because of all the tribulations, there's a word, all the tribulations that have gone on from everybody else to build to that point.
Okay. Yeah, speaking of Lord of the Rings, I'm still curious when that show is going to come out from Amazon. Not to sidetrack there, but that's one of the shows that's like on my radar to kind of wait for. AT, we'll jump over to you.
So I guess I'm kind of where Perd was, right? I haven't read any of the books or anything like that, and I think it was middle of season 6 probably where I started gaining interest because you and Nick were talking about it and the way each episode and the foreshadowing, the way that all kind of aligned and everything else, and you guys were trying to figure out, where's this going to go. And then I figured, hell with it, I'll try it, So I watched, I think by the second or third episode, it was pretty quick. I was hooked. And then I just binged all the way through. Season 6 was done by then, and pretty sure it was almost to the end of season 7, but I binged all the way through season 7 and then took, a break of a year or whatever, 2 years. And then when season 8 came out, I binged all the way 1 through 7 again. And then I watched 8 as it came out just because I was so interested. And to Nick's point, I loved rewatching it because you pick up on all the little nuances that you missed the first time. And I wish I was where you are as far as like knowing the pre-stories, because there was a couple times in some of the seasons, little things that stood out. And it's like, well, how did this squabble start or whatever? And it's like, it's previous to the show, kind of, you know what I mean? So it's like, I wish I had some of that, the story beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. I had a point that was sitting in my head, and now it's just completely gone all of a sudden. I should probably just start writing stuff down, too.
I can rattle off a little bit if you try and think about it.
Go for it here.
Something that you mentioned, too, is those of you you said you binge watched a little bit of the show. I'm really excited to hear what your comments are going to be on some of this podcast episodes, because I've only seen it once through, so absolutely since 2019, there's stuff that I'm not going to remember. It's like, oh yeah, that's right, that interaction happened, or this character had this story, or this one-liner that may or may not come back down the road. And so for those of you that were able to binge watch it, like so much of my experience with the show was speculation and what's going to happen, and I got to wait another 7 days to figure out what's going to go on, and so. To see it just in continuation all the way through, there's a lot that I'm really curious to hear your point of views on, as far as like what this character seemed like in one fell swoop versus maybe my mind running away with me between the scenes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great point there. It kind of triggered my mind of what I was thinking about. So yeah, like I did binge watch it a bunch. So to go into my history with the show, I did binge watch it. I think I started on Nick's recommendation here. He had told me basically it's like Lord of the Rings, which is probably my favorite trilogy of movies of all time, pretty much. I think Nick's recommendation came around maybe the end of season 3, season 4, whatever. So I binge watched those first seasons multiple times there. I lived with a guy who had the HBO Go account, so he went home one weekend and I just started watching the show a whole bunch and basically didn't stop until the weekend was over. And then basically from then on, I was watching each episode kind of as they aired on the HBO app. And a little background too is I've read the books. I've read the first 3 books. I kind of started book 4, but just kind of fell off because I tend to just go to sleep now when I get into my bed instead of just laying awake for a while. But yeah, like you had mentioned, AT, like little points there where you'll pick up on like your rewatch and stuff too. Like I'm definitely looking forward to like picking up on more of the little points. Like I remember the first time I watched through the show here, it was kind of hard. It was similar to like when I read through the Lord of the Rings books of like people would yell off names throughout the show and I'd be like, okay, who is that? And then I just kind of kept watching, and then finally it all started to coalesce together. Like, okay, they're talking about Ned Stark. Okay, that's the character who was played by Sean Bean. Okay, I got it. That's in my head now here. And then the second and third times and stuff through, it was just like, okay, Ned Stark right here, this is what he does. Okay, yep, picking up on all these little actions now. So you get to focus in more on the detail then of each scene instead of just watching it all through so quickly there. But yeah, that's my history on the show. Again, I kind of fall somewhere, not maybe as harshly as Purd does on the show, but it just, season 8 just took a lot out of what I enjoyed about the show so much. It's just kind of like, I kind of want to take a break from ever rewatching the show again.
And 2 years later, here you are.
And 2 years later, here that itch comes again.
Well,
So,
seven excellent seasons. Like
Nope.
Yeah.
one season, don't get me wrong, I feel some of Purge pain there. But I feel like that one season is not enough to stain the other 7 excellent seasons before it.
I'll make an argument here.
Exactly.
Everyone always wants to give season 7 a pass. I don't think, if you sit there and think about season 7 and go, okay, maybe season 7 wasn't as great as I remember, because I think, to me, it really kind of, season 6, there's one episode in particular in season 6 that is probably my second favorite episode of the entire show, but I think it kind of really stopped season 4. So to like give a little history about the show too, from what I've read here on different things about the show here, is right around season, when they started doing season 5, that's kind of when they were running out or pretty much near the end of all of the written material that George R.R. Martin had done, because
right, that's important.
he is still yet to finish the books. There are supposedly 2 books remaining, The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring.
Correct.
So they basically, the showrunners had basically started running out of material. They had the overall outline from George on where everything was headed. So you can kind of see, like, after season 4 ends and then just a little bit into season 5, or just some of the stuff they pick and choose out of season 5, you can see they've started to run out of material. So now they're really starting to bring that diamond back in a lot quicker than they were when they were branching out in the first 4 seasons, just laying down the foundation for the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, too, even going back to my history of the show, there used to be a YouTube channel I would watch religiously for updates on around the time season 6. I think I got to watching him around season 6. There was a guy who used to basically break down every episode, kind of talk about the different scenes, and then kind of go into like the backstory of like the lore from the books and everything like that, and kind of theorize what they might be heading towards or what might be happening next. So I was really drawn to watching that YouTube channel for the run of the end of the show there, just because it was like, okay, what's going to happen here? Is this guy going to be right, or is he not even close to what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
So then, Purd, you still just hardline stand, show is terrible, right?
Well, no.
Hard.
like AT said, I love the show as a whole, but when there's basically a near unlimited budget and time, as we've learned since the show finished production, that the directors had to kind of end the show as well as they started it, and they chose not to pursue other projects. It just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, where it's like, man, you really gave us a good run just to end it poorly. And so I haven't watched it since then. But yeah, I mean, it's still a fantastic show. AT's absolutely right, but that ending just leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Okay. Yeah,
I think that's...
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
You're fine. I was just going to say, I think it's fair to say, yeah, that the ending leaves a little bit more wanting for the fans. I'll let you finish your thought, but I'll just give the drop the bomb that I actually liked the ending, and I have a couple. I'm really interested to go back and watch it again now to see if, like, okay, now knowing how they've ended it, does the lead up of the first few seasons in the middle part there, does that lead to it, or are there signs that might be coming? I think that kind of watching it week to week to week, you're kind of like, all right, here's the big, here's the end, here's the last few seasons, last few episodes, what's gonna happen? And now knowing that, going back and watching that lead up again, are there little signs, are there little things that I might have missed, or in my hope, like I was saying, of us trying to read between the lines or find out where it's going, or hypothesize myself, am I missing the obvious cues that this is where it was always headed?
That's a good point. Yeah, I'm interested to see what your thoughts are then once we get towards the end. I will say
to that
one thing.
To that point, sorry to budge in real quick. To that point, I felt like watching season 8, like I don't I think it would have been really hard to go any other direction than the way they went.
I
really do.
agree. That's one of my
I think-
points.
I think that they did that season the only way that they could have, to be fair to them, you know.
So
I think that there's a lot that they could have done. Sorry, we're talking about the end and we're at the beginning. I think that there's a lot that people would have wanted to see or people could have seen. And one of my main points is that, yeah, it might not have been the way I would have done it, but it's an ending to the story they were telling. And to that point, I think, yeah, it fit the way that they ended it.
So to jump back to one of my points I was going to get into here, I always remember this one line sticking out from one of the guys. I don't remember which of the two showrunners it was, but they basically came out and said before season 7 had started, they said they have 13 hours of story left to tell. And I thought that was a very, very strange thing to say and that ended up basically being then 13 episodes. Season 7 was 7 episodes. Season 8 was 6 episodes. And I thought that just happened to be just a weird number to place on the end of your show here, when each season before that had been 10 episodes long. Each episode was roughly about an hour. Granted, they got a little longer in the later season, in those last 2 seasons. But it was just such a strange comment to come out at the time and say, yeah, we have 13 hours of story left to tell. And I'm like, there's still a lot that has to kind of happen here.
That's kind of a weird statement.
And I started theorizing, well, maybe this season they'll do this, and then this season they'll take care of this or whatever. And then it didn't end that way, the way I had thought. So I was just kind of like, okay. When season 8 rolled around, I'm like, man, they still have a lot to do to try and wrap this all up. But we'll see what happens.
I think that there's a couple of those. There's a couple of those sort of external peripheral statements that came out from people. Often have called them D&D. You know, Dave Benioff and David Weiss, I think, are their names. But people have referenced, like they said that phrase, and there's another one where the story was that HBO was willing to extend them for another season if they felt like there was more that they wanted to tell, and they were like, nope, we're good. We've got the story we want. And so that whole aspect too, that maybe just as writers in their heads, this was always going to be their end game. And it was just, how do we fill in the blocks to that point, knowing where we want to end it? And so, yeah, it seems very strange that we could fit this in 13 hours. It's such a weird sentence to say. It's like saying, I'm going to die tomorrow. You know, it's like, well, shit, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to happen between now and tomorrow. But just if that's the thought they have in their mind, it's the finality of it that is jarring. And then how they do that is the little finesse that rounds out the characters in the stories, or doesn't.
JC, you going to make a point there?
No, I was just saying that y'all are talking like, oh yeah, we'll see what happens with this ending, and I have no idea. So I'm really going along for the ride this time too. So yeah.
Can I ask you? Yeah, so go ahead, Bert. I think you're going to ask the same thing.
I was just going to say, I'm curious to see which storylines you really want to see wrapped up, and they just never do. I'm curious to see which ones you remember that I still remember, and I know I've forgotten a few.
I was going to ask, hearing our comments about how we feel based on how it ends, is there anything, not knowing, JC, that you're... I guess it's just I was trying to find a specific question
about how it ends.
Yeah, is there any like big picture things that you're curious about, or things that you're like, oh well, I guess maybe I should be let down going in about this, or maybe there's some aspect or some character, like you said, you've seen a couple seasons already, at least at the beginning. Is there some aspect of something that you're worried about, or something that you just know going in, oh well, I guess I shouldn't be too attached to whatever?
I mean, yeah, I guess I've got my expectations dampened a bit just by all the furor around the ending of this show. So I'm not gonna hopefully get too worked up and be hyped at the end of season whatever, 6, 7, whichever one it is, where I'm like, oh man, I can't wait. I'll just be like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to the end time here.
Time to find out what everyone's talking about here.
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, if part of it is just like, oh, there's a lack of closure and some things don't get tied up, like if that just basically means that it's not the Return of the King ending where it goes and has 70 different endings for every single character, awesome. I love it already. Like I don't need to see that, yep, these two people are hanging out jumping on beds. Yep, awesome. Like cool. I presume they'd lived. I don't know. I don't need to see everything.
That's fair. I
We'll
like
see.
that.
I can't tell. Do you like the Lord of the Rings endings?
No, you can't tell.
And now the movie's done. Oh, okay, sit back down.
Yeah, no. I enjoyed the opening hour of Return of the King, and then the 2-hour ending was not too great.
2-hour ending, man. You must have missed some of the movie. That movie's like 6 hours long.
No, the extended editions that y'all do, forget them. I ain't got time for that.
I don't know who's
Jeez
y'all.
Louise.
I will not watch those either.
Oh yeah, no, like forget it. I'll just read the book. No, I ain't got time. Yeah, it takes me more time to watch your 3 extended edition movies than it takes to watch all 6 of the original and prequel trilogy of Star Wars, you've not done good job at editing. That's yeah. You need to do something.
Oh, we'll have to agree to disagree there, sir, because I absolutely love the extended editions.
That's the only editions I can watch now, thanks to you, Tyler.
Yeah.
I think a little bit of it is has to be masturbatory. It's kind of, the way it's done. Does it speak to you or does it not? I'm more on the extended edition when it comes to Lord of the Rings type stuff. But there are some movies where it's like, oh hey, did you know that this this fan world has supplemental material? And it's like pass. So
Yeah, so like all the Star Wars like expanded universe stuff, like never cared for that sort of stuff.
Oh, no. That was already too deep if I ever wanted to try and dig into that. As someone who read The Lord of the Rings, though, when I was younger, like watching those movies and then watching the extended editions, it's like, oh yeah, the extended editions are the way to go for me because they are more closely tied to the events of the book. Granted, Fellowship of the Ring cuts out an entire section at the beginning of the Hobbit's journey, but still, I like the Lord of the Rings movies, the extended editions, just for that reason.
As someone who has not gotten big into reading medieval books and such like that, whatever sort of high fantasy fiction or whatever it would be, like the only comparison I can really make is like the Watchmen director's cut. Like I get it because I like the director's cut more, but I also recognize that like I shouldn't recommend the director's cut to people if I want them to watch The Watchmen. Like that's not the best way for someone who is completely new to the material to watch that. So
Sure.
It's just this weird dichotomy, I think, to where
I'll
some
agree.
folks are just they know what's good for them, but it's hard for them to separate what's good for goose versus gander.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would agree. Don't recommend watching the director's ultimate cut or whatever the heck it is for The Watchmen.
Yeah.
I own that one, and
3.5 hours with the motion comic interspliced. Yeah.
Yep, I prefer that one. I prefer that one too. But I have also read the Watchmen comic, and I know that I would not recommend this to just anyone.
Right. So yeah.
know your audience.
Know your audience.
Exactly.
Right.
And hey, if that was the thing too, that like Game of Thrones was catering to this type of audience that expected more closure, whatever, like they should have kind of known that too going in. But I'm completely speaking in hypotheticals here, so yeah.
That's
see how
a
it goes.
really interesting point. If I can ask a question to the group at large, I think that as far as like the crossover between TV series becoming almost cinematic in their own, I think Game of Thrones really over this last decade was kind of pioneering a lot of that. I mean, what did they get towards the end? Like almost $1 million budget per episode.
Oh, I think it was way beyond that.
Ridiculous. Yeah,
And
it was way more.
I think that sort of like there's certainly been TV series, I'm sure, over the years, I can't think of any right now, that have sort of pushed that envelope with budget and, the characters and the actors playing these roles have kind of become superstars for the roles that they're playing, and they're world-renowned faces now because of this show that's, catapulted them into the limelight. Just a question to the group at large, like, what are your thoughts about TV series that aim to be more cinematic and movies like that? Is that helpful? Does it have to be done a certain way, or something that really speaks to you when they're done like that?
I think if they have the story to tell, that's probably the way to go. I mean, Game of Thrones is a perfect example of that. The first, Tyler pointed out, the first couple of couple seasons, all the episodes are right about an hour, 40 minutes, somewhere in there. But then you get to like the last couple of seasons, and they spread out. I mean, I can think of specifically 2 of the episodes in season 8 that are, they got to be like an hour and a half or better, and that's almost a full feature movie,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm all for them. I'm an American. Give me as much content as I can possibly handle.
Yeah, I'm an
Spectacle.
anti-American. I hate the consumerism of just like, oh, just shove stuff at my face. Trim it up. Brevity is the soul of wit. Don't waste my time.
I like
So,
that.
yeah.
Brevity is the soul of wit.
So yeah, no, as someone who doesn't, like I said, I don't usually just watch TV. So like, it's been one of those weird things to try and like make that switch in the past decade of like, okay, well, these are kind of the quality of movies, and they're telling stories that are semi-analogous to movies, but it's also a weird thing in the era of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and stuff, where those things, they may have just been better as series like this, instead of these gigantic feature films that take forever to come out. I mean, yeah, granted, COVID has disrupted a bunch of that, but I mean, like, I just kind of don't care about what happens with the next Marvel movie at this point. But the next HBO miniseries that comes out, like, sign me up.
I mean, to that point, most of these, like you mentioned, Marvel, most of those comic books have been out since the 60s, and they're just telling the stories that most people have already read. Are we finding, I'm curious, are we finding better stories, or has the advent of technology allowed us to tell these stories that some people know in a more exciting way?
I'd say it's the latter, 100%. It's the same story, right? Not a lot has changed in the movies, but the way they're presenting it is phenomenally better.
CGI
I think that's
makeup
why it
effects.
seems like as far as movies are concerned lately, it seems like every 30 years or so, we're remaking a movie that was made, previously. Right. I mean, that's been happening a lot lately. It's like nobody, I don't know, that could have something to do with just kind of lack of imagination as far as writers are concerned. They're not, I mean, that's kind of how it is, right? If you're not going to write new content, you just find an old movie that did all right and then kind of renew it and play it again. It's a different audience, different time, better CGI, better effects and everything else. And I mean, most of them do really well.
Yeah, I would say, to go back to your first question there, Nick, I would kind of echo, I think it was AT who said this, of just kind of like, if the story is there and they can fill in, as an example, 10 episodes worth of content with quality stuff, I will happily sit down and watch a pilot series or a series, HBO series like this. Like, I watched The Watchmen, and the only tie that has is basically just the name to the comic book, and I thought that was really interesting too. That's what drew me in, but then just kind of watching the story and seeing where it goes was interesting to me. Or even to I think maybe AT and I are the only two who have probably seen this, Westworld.
You've talked a lot about Westworld, yeah.
I finished the first season of it.
Okay. So I was kind of drawn into Westworld because it was like the next big thing from HBO. So it's like, okay, I'll check it out to see what it is. And I remember I was just absolutely like confused, lost. I don't know what the right word is just trying to understand what was going on basically throughout the first few episodes there. And it wasn't until the end when they started wrapping all of the thread lines back together. I was like, okay, wow, yeah, yep, I got this. This is really good. So as long as they've got the story there to tell, I will happily come along for the ride. And I will, agree, movies are starting to get longer and longer and longer. Like Endgame, Avengers Endgame is 3.5 hours long. And granted,
yeah,
they had 10, I don't know, how many movies was it? Like 23 movies?
Yeah, something like that.
So basically they had this
20s.
entire plot line of stuff to kind of all coalesce that they were basically slowly building for. And most of it wasn't really on purpose, but it was just like leaving little pieces here and there to kind of slowly guide us towards, okay, Thanos is coming, Thanos is here, now we're going to deal with Thanos, basically. So, I mean, there could definitely be some work in cutting down movie runtimes sometimes, but also, too, like, if the story is there, again, I will happily sit through a 3.5 hour movie in the theater, just eyes glued to the screen the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I guess we've kind of hit on everything there. Kind of diverged a little bit into side stuff too, which is perfectly fine for this kind of podcast. Anything else you guys want to kind of throw out there about the show, or kind of things you're kind of looking to experience or gain kind of while rewatching it? I'm just kind of.
I'm just looking forward to like finding out all the other things that I've missed even through the second watch through, because there was so much between the second and first time. It's like, oh my gosh, like this guy said this thing and it's foreshadowing like 6 episodes ahead and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty fascinating to me, especially like there's one character who's very involved with all the happenings, and once you learn who that is and you start to pay attention to what he's talking about, it's like, holy shit, this guy knows what he's talking about. That was pretty fascinating to me.
Okay. Nick.
I'm assuming I'm just going to find out more as the third.
On your third watch through, you're going to find out even more.
Yep.
All right, Nick, what do you got?
I'd say the same thing, just to rewatch the show again, especially in those early seasons, sort of like AT was talking about, just the little ground world building, but also laying the foundation for the relationships between the characters and how they act with one another, and who they think they're allies with and who they are thinking that they're not allies with. So really interesting interactions.
Okay. JC.
I'm excited to see what the Red Wedding is about. I heard a lot about that. So I really like love stories, so it sounds like it's going to be a good time.
It's all fine.
So loving.
It's just a tender moment in the whole show.
All right. And Purd, what do you got?
Funny that JC says that, because I'm very excited just to hear his reactions to all the nutty twists that come along with the show. I'm excited to re-experience them in a smaller sense, but it'll be fun to hear a newbie's thoughts.
And a little bit correlation to what I was saying. Essentially, all the stuff that everybody talked about all the time going into it. It's like I'm curious to experience that the first time, but also then to like take what we're experiencing and then like use that against Nick's lore book and see like maybe there's some plot threads that we think we see and understand, and like, oh nope, actually it turns out this or that. So that'll be an interesting little thing to have that resource at our disposal.
Okay, cool. And myself is just kind of, not only, I'm going to be curious to kind of listen to like what you have to say about the show, JC, because you'll get to experience basically from start to finish without having to have any wait time in between seasons like the rest of us experienced. And two, I'm just kind of
time between seasons. I mean, geez,
yeah.
List. It's going to be 37 weeks of this.
Well, this is a show that ran for 8 seasons, so try and
if you can commit to 1 episode a day.
and then
I'll try and keep on pace for the episodes, so that way I'm pure whenever we get to each episode, and I have no idea what's happening next time.
And then for me,
I really like this character. They're so nice. I hope they stick around for a long time.
Yep.
And then also too, I'm just kind of curious to just kind of rewatch the show again to kind of maybe, excuse me, like you said, Nick, just see, is there anything that was maybe more foreshadowing of kind of how we got to the end that we did. But then, yeah, I suppose that is it. Any final comments here from anyone? Oh, I suppose too. I should lay out to what the episodes are going to be that we're going to watch.
Sure.
So
what's up for next time?
Yep. So I sat down, kind of looked at the episode guide here, just for anyone else listening in. I sat down, looked at the list of episodes, and kind of went through it in my mind and going, okay, I remember roughly what happens in these episodes here. So I kind of grouped at least the first 6 seasons together in kind of a similar fashion. Well, I take that back. Looking at my list here, about the first 4 seasons, they're grouped. Nope, not even that's correct here. I basically grouped the seasons kind of in a way that I grouped chunks of episodes together, and then as like one block of our next episode would be talking about these chunks of like 4 episodes, and then towards the back half of some of the later part of the seasons there, I broke it down to do some of the individual episodes, just because episode 9 was always big about having one big thing happening in episode 9 here that kind of impacted not only the rest of the season, but kind of further seasons going forward. And then episode 10 was always a good kind of summation of this is what's kind of come on through the season, and we're setting the pieces in place for the season to come. So to start off with here, for season 1, episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4 for next time. So we'll watch Winter is Coming, The King's Road, Lord Snow, and then episode 4 is titled Crippleds, Bastards, and Broken Things.
Okay.
All right.
Stuff.
All right, so that should do us for the Got Rewatch podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you next time.